Good morning, one and all. Now I am going to explain the concept of transactions in Dbms. Basically, what is transaction means? Transaction is an operation, is a logically related operation. So that is, it contains group of tasks. So what are the operation going to be performed in the database? That is called a transaction. So the transaction is an action or a series of action, that is connection of more than one operation. It is performed by a single user to perform an operation for accessing the content of the database. So basically we have to do some corrections, updation in the database. Means we have to take a transaction in that database, then only we can make a changes in the database. That is, we are naming that transaction. That is, I am reading one data, or I am going to writing the data, or updating the data, recover the data. So these are the some of the operations of the database. These can be performed by some actions, that is called transactions. Next one is, so for example, this is a bank. If there is a new bank is created in your area, means you are going go to the bank and you have to create an account, and then you have to make a transaction. Transaction means a deposit and then make a withdrawal. So we have to accessing a ATM card like that. So here the transactions are, you are creating account, you are depositing a amount, and then you have to get the ATM. These are the transaction. So series of action that is made on your account, that is called a transaction. So for example, X account and Y account. There are two types of account holder are there. First one operation is open the account, and the old balance is X balance. So what is the data of X that is stored in the X balance? A new balance is, now I have to deduct the value 800 from the old balance. So that is the new balance. So now I have to update this new balance to the old balance. So I get, after saving this balance, new balance only, I have to close the account. So this is a simple transaction, and here the actions are open the account, old balance is read, and then old balance minus some transaction 800, and then I have to save the new balance to the X value, and then I have to close the X account. So now I am taking a 5 series of actions in this account, that is called transaction. The same way, in Y account I am adding 800 rupees to this old balance. So the new balance is updated and the new balance is stayed in the Y account and close the account. So this is a series of action that is called transactions. Next one is this is a simple transaction example. Read your account balance, deduct the amount from your balance, and then writing the remaining balance to your account. Then read the friend's account balance, and then add the amount to his account balance. That is, other account means you can add the amount, but you cannot get the amount. Okay, so that we have to add the amount to other friend's account, and write the new updated balance to his account, and then whole set of operation can be called a transaction. So we have to make some changes in the database, that is called that is performed by a series of action, that is called transaction. Next one is operations of transaction. So the main operations are two operations. One is read and another one is write operation. So here the read operation is a read the database value. So that is, it get the data from the database and store it in the buffer in a main memory. Okay, so that is the database account, database having a detail. I need to read the data and what is current consistent state of database. That is a read action. Next one is write action. So after performing some operation, I have to return back to the database so that the database value can be changed. So it will change to the next consistent state. That is, after changing the value, after performing the operation, and then we have to change the database value. So that is next consistent state. So write means it perform the data value to the database, writing the data to the database. Next one is other two operations. So one is commit operation and another one is rollback operation. So what is a commit means? Once I have made a transaction, so in this transaction I have to completely successful the process. That is, I am getting the open the balance, open the account and add the amount, and I have to changes the new balance, and then I have to close the account. So now my series of actions are completed. So I have to completed the operation, so the commit operation is performed, so the transaction is successful. Next operation is rollback. Now I have not completed my operation. That is, when I am adding an amount or withdrawal the amount, I have some problem. So my transaction is not completed. So it roll back the first consistent state. That is, it cannot add any amount to this database, and it does not change any balance value. Then it goes to the rollback state, that is old consistent state. So what is the first state of database that will be executed? So that is, it terminate the operations and then it roll back to the before database condition. That is called rollback. Next one is transaction processing system. So what is transaction processing system means? Transaction means a series of action, and then processing system means multiple transactions are made at a time. That is, multiple uses this database concurrently. That is a processing system. So we are using a reservation system, banking system. So these are the transaction processing system. Now concurrently more than one user executing a database transaction at a time. That is a transaction processing system. Next one is transaction properties. So what is property means? If you are making some operations on a database means, we must follow this four property. The database must execute these four property. So what it means? Atomicity, consistency, isolation and durability. So what is atomicity means? It means either all successful or none. That is, there is a consistent. What is a consistent state means? So here I am having a new balance and old balance. So first one is old balance. I am reading a old balance. That is a first state, first consistent state. So now in atomicity, I have to perform all the value atomicity. So here atomicity means before transaction A equal to 600, B equal to 300. First T1, and transaction T2 having A equal to 500 and B equal to 400. So that is actually transaction T1 perform A deduction, A amount deduction. Transaction T2 performs B amount deduction. So before transaction the values are A equal to 600, B equal to 300. Okay. So after making some transaction, these two transactions T1 and T2, I have to make the whole operation executed. So these two operations are executed. The A value is 500 and B equal to 400. So if these two values are updated in the database means, that is a atomicity. Otherwise, the basic any operation cannot be performed. That is, if perform whole operation means it the database is updated. Otherwise, it does not perform any operation. So, if any rollback condition or if any abort condition is created means, so here the a equal to 600 and b equal to 300 is maintained. A equal to 600 and b equal to 300 is maintained. That is first consistent state. So the database value cannot be changed because I have not completed all the operations. So I cannot perform. So this is a atomicity. So atomicity means all the operations of the transaction take place at once. If not, the transaction is aborted. So all the A operation and B operation also completed. Otherwise, the transaction is aborted. So in the midway, the transaction cannot occur partially. Each transaction is treated as one unit and either run to completion or it is not executed at all. So that is once midway one transaction is completed but other transaction is not completed means it cannot be updated in the database. So it abort the operation, so that it involves two operation, that is abort and commit. So if a transaction abort, then all the changes may not be visible. They are not be visible. So commit means if the transaction commit means if the transaction commits, then all the changes made are visible. So this is a successful state, and abort means that is a rollback state, that is first consistent state, that is atomicity. So it take all the operations successful, otherwise it does not perform any changes in the database. So this is a best example. A is 600, B is 300. So after commit operation, A value is 500 and B equal to 400. Otherwise, the A equal to 600 is maintained. If it is aborted means this consistent state is maintained. Next one is consistency. So what is a consistency means? The integrity constraints are maintained so that the database consistent before and the after transaction. So what is consistent means? Once I have to make the changes completely, so then only the database value is changed. There is one consistent state to another consistent state is defined. So that is a consistency. So here after the transaction I have the amount 900. Before the transaction I had the amount 900 because 600 and 300 is 900, and then after the transaction also I have the amount 500, 400 and 900. That is the value is added here. So the value is added here means that whole transaction values are not changed. This is a consistent state. So the T1 and T2 are maintains the consistent state. If T1 is performed but T2 is not performed means T2 operation failed means here the value will be changed. This value is 300. Then 300 means here the value is 800. If the first before transaction value is 900, after transaction value is 800 means the value is aborted. So the transaction is inconsistent. So consistent means after making changes the transaction values are same. That is called consistency. Next one is isolation. So what does isolation mean? Isolation is a important concept in this database. It shows the data which is used at a time of execution of a transaction cannot be used by second transaction until the first one is completed. So that is if I am making it for example I am going for a ATM, I am making a transaction 500 from the ATM. If I am taking a amount 500, at the same way the transaction of my check is also processed in the bank. So I am using a check I am using a ATM card in a ATM machine. At the same time, there is another check. My check is processed in the bank means first it transaction of my ATM card is proceed, then only the check will be proceeded. So after completion of my operation only, it goes to the check. So at a time I can made one transaction at a time. So that is one account having a one transaction at a time. So another action can be performed after completion of my first operation, that is a isolation. This is very important one. If more than one user making a transaction in a one account means it creates more problem. So if somebody not accessing a more amount at the time, there is no amount in a bank in your balance means it abort the transaction. So it also abort other transactions also. So we have to make a isolation, that is after completion of one transaction only we can make the changes into the other transaction. So that is isolation. So if in isolation the transaction T1 is being executed and using the data item X, and then the data item cannot be accessed by any other T2 transaction until T1 is ends. So what is T1 means my ATM account, and T2 means this is a check processed. So T1 after completion of T1 my ATM process, the check processing will be executed. That is a isolation. This concurrency control subsystem of Dbms enforced the isolation property. Next one is durability. So this is a main property. Durability is used to indicate the performance of a database consistent state. It is the state that the transition made the permanent changes. So that is one consistent state to another consistent state. So if any failure made means we have to recover the data from old stage. The database must be updated in the transaction completed only. So that is very important for durable database consistency. So that is called durability. So they cannot be lost the erroneous operation of a faulty transaction or by the failure. So when the transaction is completed, then the database reaches a state are known as consistent state. So transaction completed means the state is consistent state. If the transaction aborted means it goes to the old consistent state. So always the database maintains a consistent state. So the consistent state cannot be lost even the lost of the system failure. The recovery of subsystem of database has been responsibility of durability property. So due to this durability property, we can recover the subsystem of database system. Okay, so these are the four properties. And what are the states of transactions? So first I have a active state. This is a beginning operation. Second one, partially committed, that is one transaction is completed but other is in process, that is partially committed. Second one is if second is not committed means that will be failed. So that cannot goes to the consistent state. So that is failed. If second transaction is also completed, then it goes to the committed state. Then end. After committed means the transaction is completed. So it goes to end. The database go to the next consistent state. If transaction is not consistent state means the transaction will be aborted and it goes to the old consistent state. So what a state means? Active state. The active state is the first state of every transaction. In this state the transaction is being executed. So for example, insertion, deletion or updation of a record is done here, but all the records still not saved to the database. So here the active state is a begin state, so no database data can be saved. First initial state we can made a changes. So second one is partially committed. So what is partially committed means? In partially committed, a transaction execute its final operation, but the data is still not saved to the database, because one transaction is completed but another transaction is not completed, so it is on the midway. So the total mark calculation example, the final display of total marks step is executed in this state. Next, committed. The transaction is said to be committed, then it executes all operations successfully, then the values are stored in the database permanently. So the transaction is completed. Now the database go to one stage to another consistent state, that is old consistent state to another consistent state, that is updated state. Next one is failed state. So if any of the checks made the database recovery system fails, then the transaction is said to be failed state. So any mark calculation is not able to fetch in the mark, means here at the time there is a fail condition. So fail condition means it goes to the aborted state. So next state is aborted. So if any of the check fail and the transaction has reached to failed state, means the database recovery will make sure that the database is in the previous consistent state, because there is no committed operation is executed. So it goes to the old stage. So old consistent state. It is, if not, that will be aborted or roll back the transaction to bring the database into a consistent state. Whatever it is, if it is committed, means it goes to the committed consistent state, and if it is not committed, means failed, or aborted means it goes to the old consistent state. That's all. So if the transaction fails in the midway of the transaction, means before executing the transaction, all executed transaction are rolled back. So whatever it is, if it is partially committed or it is failed, any transaction made, all the transaction rolled back and goes to the previous database consistent state. So after aborting the transaction, we have to recover the module by two operations. First one is restart the transaction, and second one is kill the operation, kill the transaction. So now I am killing the transaction, then it goes to restart the transaction, and I have to begin the active state, and partially committed, then committed, like that I have to commit the operation. So that is 5 stages of states of transactions. So thank you one and all. So now the transaction and transaction property and what are the states of properties are explained.